All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining or listening in to this Knowledge is Power Hour, Mastering Microsoft Word. Today's session, which is the second in our series, is going to focus on table and figure formatting. Specifically, I'm going to walk through APA standards on table formatting, talking about how to label both tables and figures. And then in addition to formatting the labels correctly, how you apply a heading style to those, and with that heading style, create your list of tables and figures. So we're sort of going to be picking up where we left off in the week 1 session. So if you haven't seen that recording yet, I do strongly recommend you watch that recording just after this one, so that you have a good idea of how to create a comprehensive table of contents and make sure all your headings throughout your document are labeled correctly. To show you everything we're going to talk about today, I am going to bring up a Word document, a sample document for you. This is the same document that we used in that first session, so it might look familiar to you. Okay, so let's first talk, as we mentioned, about formatting the table itself. As you see here, I'll make this a little larger. We have a table. It's a fairly simple table. So there is one row of what is called a column heading. So we're labeling each column here in the table. And then we have one row for each column. So this is a very basic table. You might have a more complex table. I can show you some examples of those in just a moment as well. So the biggest thing about APA style tables is that there should not be any vertical lines. What APA preference is that we're looking at a very streamlined table where there's only as many lines as you absolutely need to distinguish the start of the table and the end of the table, as well as the start and end of those those column headers. So what I'm going to do first thing, well, first of all, I recommend when you're creating a table, don't worry too much about the formatting. Okay, I do recommend, you place your cursor where you want your table to appear. You come up to the insert menu and you see where it says table. You can select table, and we'll just say we need a table with 4 columns. 6 rows or 7 rows here. So this is fine. That's great. I recommend, you just start filling in your table. Again, don't worry too much about the formatting itself, right? Get all the information that you need in your table, then we'll worry about the formatting. So once you do have all your content in that table that you need, now we want to make it look like an APA compliant table. So what we're going to do is when you click on a table, you should see this crossbar icon show up. That allows you to select the entire table. And as you notice, when I clicked it, a menu option popped up for my table itself. So you can use that. However, you can also use the menus that are at the top of the page. Either one is same. It's bringing up the same menu. This is just a shortcut to the functions that Microsoft Word thinks you might need for formatting your table. And this is where we want to be. So we're going to select the borders option. This is also on your home menu. So if you see under the paragraph, you can also have the same border menu appears. So either place is fine, you can use it. So the first thing I recommend you do is that you get rid of all of the borders. So in APA style, you don't want any vertical lines whatsoever. So you're not going to have any up and down lines. And again, we want very minimal horizontal lines. We're just distinguishing the column headers and then the end of the table. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select my first row. Okay, so this again, as I mentioned, these are our column headers. So we do need to make these stand out from the rest of the table by using lines. So I'm going to select a border at the top because remember, we need that top border to show this is where my table begins. And then I'm going to put a bottom border on that column header row because now I'm distinguishing my column header from the rest of the rows in my table. And then the only other line that you want in your table is to distinguish the end of the table. So I'm going to select my very last row, come back up to my menu, and I'm going to put a bottom border there. It's underneath this bottom border that if you needed to add a note to your table, oops, you would put that, whoops, sorry, underneath that very bottom. I'll talk more about that in just a moment here. Okay, so now we have this. So another way to make your tables more readable is that per APA, although the all of the text in your document should be double spaced. APA does permit the use of single spacing in tables just to make them more compact, more concise. It also usually improves the readability. Now, and if for some reason you feel like that is not the case, you don't have to use single spacing. You can spread that text out a little bit, right? So here is where you have a little bit of freedom with the spacing that you use. What you want is you want a table that is as concise as possible, okay, using up as little space as possible, but is still readable. I would say in this case, you know, maybe having a little bit of extra white space in there, so a little bit of extra spacing might be good. But by and large, this is a fairly easy table to read. The other part of formatting is that you do want your column headers to be bold so that, again, they stand out just a little bit. So now what we have here is a table that is itself properly formatted. So let's do that one more time. So we have another table here. This one's a bit different. This is a text-based table. That's fine. You can definitely put text into a table like this. Very helpful, for example, in a qualitative study at the beginning of chapter 4, if you want a text-based table to identify the themes that you're going to be discussing throughout the chapter. Tables can be really handy for that. So let's again select the entire table. We're going to get rid of the borders. I'm going to select my column headers. I'm going to add a top border and a bottom border. I'm going to come to the very last row of the table. And I'm going to add that bottom border. I'm going to make my column headers bold. Now I'm going to select the entire table and let's see what this looks like if it is single spaced. Okay, so notice how this is an instance where single spacing might not be your best choice because it's hard to discern when you're looking at this text where the one row begins and the other one ends. So one thing you can do is keep the text single spaced and then just hit your enter key. Here, I'll turn on my show hide. So if you hit your enter key at the end of each row, that allows for a little bit of that extra white space to help discern where one row ends and the next begins. So that's one option. Or you can play, as I mentioned before, you can play around with spacing a little bit. So let's say instead we want to select this and just say, okay, well, what does it look like if we add a little more space? That could work here. I think though the previous option might be better. I think in this case, I would use standard single spacing and then just add some space, a line break after each row like that. Because when you turn that off, now that becomes, see how this portion is much more readable than this portion. But again, you can play around with that a little bit, the line spacing within your rows itself, just to decide what is the most readable, what makes the most sense for this particular table. But no matter what, you don't want any of those vertical lines, and your only horizontal lines should be around the column headers and at the very end of the table. Labeling the table itself, both tables and figures will be labeled in the same manner. You want to make sure that the table number is bold and that the table title is in italics like it is here. But the table title also has to be in what's called title case. So you need to be capitalizing all of the major words in this, oops, in this title. You don't have to have it, you should not have it be a sentence, so there should not be any punctuation there. So now this is labeled correctly. We'll go up here. So again, we need to make this one bold. Make sure that that is title case. You want to keep your titles as concise as possible, so ask yourself, is the information included? Is it absolutely necessary? What words should I use to make sure my reader has a very good understanding of what content is in this table? Another thing I want to point out, however, I want to add a disclaimer that this should be one of the very last things that you address in your manuscript once you have all of your text, is that you do want as much as possible for tables to all appear as a single unit on a single page, right? So rather than having the number and the title separated from the table itself, you want to try to have those appear all on the same page. The reason I say wait to do that is because as you make revisions to your document, you might be pushing that spacing a little bit. You might eliminate some text, moving the table up, add text, moving it down, and so forth. So this really should be one of the last things you do, is moving around your tables and figures. And because of that, I recommend that one of the last things you do is create those lists of tables and figures, because you're not exactly sure what page they're going to land on until you're really at the very end stage of formatting your document. We're going to label these much like we would any other heading style. So I want you're actually in this case, so you're going to select both the table number as well as the table title. We'll pop out that styles menu. And you might have a style for APA tables and figures already. If not, remember, it's quite easy to do that with your styles menu open. You're going to click on the new style icon. We'll call this APA table. Have it be paragraph. We're going to base it on no style. We want the text that follows to be normal. You want it to be standard double spacing, no other indents. Click OK. Notice that what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the default for this to be bold, and then you will have to do a little bit of tweaking afterwards. So now what this has done is it made the title bold, which we don't want it to be. So I'm just going to unbold it, but I'm not changing. I'm keeping the heading, sorry, the style label there. I just made it so that part wasn't bold. Let's scroll up in this document. I think, yeah, we have a figure right up here. So here's a figure as well. So figures, same with tables. You want as much as possible for the figure number, title, and the figure itself to all appear on one page. Remember, you can fiddle around with sizing a little bit, right? If you don't need the figure to be taking up so much space, it doesn't have to. So you can resize it a little if you need to. But in APA 7th edition, so it used to be that we labeled figures underneath. I'm going to get rid of that, because in the 7th edition APA style, we actually want to label these figures much or exactly the same way that we do our tables. So the figure number is going to be bold, not italicized. The title is going to have to be in title case and italicized, just like that table. You should not have any description in your figure title. So if you need to have description, much like this student has done, we're going to do that in a note at the bottom. The word note itself should be italicized, and then you can add whatever description you need to add there. Okay, so now we have our figure number and title. So now we're also going to give this a style so we can pull it into our list of figures. So again, I'm going to create a new style. We'll call it APA figure. Oops, no style. Style that follows is normal. We want it to be double spaced, no extra spacing. Just double check. That looks good. Okay. Again, it's made this bold, so that's okay. I'm just going to select, and then I'm going to say not bold, but it still is carrying that style heading that I gave it. Okay, so this is what our figure labels should be. Now, sometimes look at this. So you see you have the student has the figure out. So you can, I also recommend that you place your figure itself in line with the text. Because that's going to keep it where it needs to go. It's going to make sure that, as you notice how that image was sort of floating off the page there, we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So I recommend you put those images in line with the text. Okay, so that means when you place your cursor above it, and for example, you hit the enter key, see how that image itself moves. This makes it much easier to manipulate your text around the figure. So let's grab this figure number. We're going to come up, we're going to place it up here. So I'm just going to model this one more time. So the figure number is not italicized, it's bold. I'm going to move this description. Get rid of this extra white space here. We don't need all that extra space. Description, oops. I'm going to put a note at the bottom. I'm going to italicize, oops, the word note. I'm going to make my title case. Make sure that's italicized. Now I'm going to label it as my APA figure. Just remove the bold there. Okay, so we've gone through how to format a table, how to label your tables and your figures, how to apply those style headings to your tables and figures. So now what we need to do is bring these into your lists of tables and figures. So we are going to scroll back up to the top of our document where the table of contents is. I also have, so one handy thing to know, and I think I pointed this out in our last session too, but just a quick reminder, a good way to quickly navigate through your document is to pull up what's called the navigation pane. So on the top of your Microsoft Word menu, if you navigate over to the view menu, so if you click on view, and then you'll see in the show options, you can click navigation pane. So I do recommend you have your navigation pane open because this allows you to quickly move. So let's say, I mean, if I was all the way at the bottom, you know, of this 176 page document, it's a pain in the butt to scroll up, right? So instead of doing that, we want to just navigate to it. So if I just pull up, I've got my pages up here and I say, okay, I need my list of figures. And I click on that and then boom, it brings me right there. So it eliminates that need to scroll. All right, so here we are with our list of figures. Oops. I do recommend you always have this show hide. Remember, we have that show hide on when we are doing formatting, so we make sure we don't inadvertently erase formatting that we already have in the document. Okay, so much like we created that table of contents, we're going to come up to the references menu, click on table of contents, click on custom table of contents. In that options menu, so this is our list of figures. We're going to say APA figure is pulling in. That's our first level. We don't need anything else in. We only have one level here coming in. See that preview? Looks just like we wanted to. Click OK. We do not, so you will often be prompted, do you want this to replace your other table contents? Definitely click no. We're just adding in a new option, a new one. So here, notice now I have some extra lines here that we can get rid of. So what you would want to do here is I'm going to put a colon and a space, and now I'm going to just use my delete key to bring up so that the figure number and the title are on the same line. So again, I put a colon in, I put a space in, and then I hit my delete key 2 times to bring that title up to the same line as the number. Okay, we can do that again here with our list of tables. Custom table of contents. Click on options. I want my APA table to be the first option, getting rid of everything else. Click OK. Click OK. Do not want to replace that. Okay, same thing. I'm going to put a colon in, a space, using my delete key to bring those up to the same line. And voila, now you have that list of tables and list of figures. If you do create your list of tables and figures, and then you have to manipulate your text throughout your manuscript, that's okay. You can update this table of contents in the same way you would your other table of contents. So if you need to change the page numbers, you can do that. You can click update field. and update the page numbers if you think that those figures or tables have moved pages within your manuscript. So I'm going to pause there. Phyllis, I know you're in the chat. Do you have any questions or would like me to demonstrate anything again? All right, well, thank you for attending and listening. If you do have any questions or comments about today's presentation, you can always reach out to us. Questions are answered within 24 business hours. So if you have a question about how to format your document, feel free to email us onlinewritingcenter@thechicagoschool.edu. If you have something longer that you would like us to review, if you want to just have a spot check your formatting throughout your entire manuscript, we do ask that you make an appointment so that we have sufficient time to do that. You can make an appointment with us through the community site by clicking on Writing Resources and then clicking on the Online Writing Center. So thank you again for listening, and we hope to see you soon.